So let's continue then with our Tuesday review with Pasquale Iannone, who's in Edinburgh, and Natasha Raskin Sharp with me in our Edinburgh studio. And we're turning to a music documentary, and it's the latest in BBC Two's series looking at the impact of American acts on the UK. This is When Blondie Came to Britain, and it examines the impact that the band have had on British pop culture and the role that UK audiences have played in maintaining the band's popularity over the decades. Here's a flavourette. Oh, and tell you what, we don't have that just now. So let me ask you, Natasha, did you enjoy this one?
Absolutely. I found it a really easy watch. It's just one of those documentaries that will tick along for 60 minutes, and after that hour has passed, you'll just feel a bit warm and fuzzy because what's not to like about Blondie?
Yeah.
And it really does what it says on the tin. It really focuses on the British element of their success. And the one thing I particularly loved about it, apart from the archive, which is sensational, and you wouldn't have that sensational archive if Debbie Harry didn't, let's face it, look just
she's extraordinary.
Like such a star. My goodness, she was just made to be in front of a camera. But what's so lovely is that it's the pre-internet days. And so it's all about the music press and the journalists talking about how there seemed to be this band coming from New York who were already big. Yeah. And in reality, they had been really overlooked by the CBGB's crowd. They were kind of bottom of the roster. But it was the music press. There had been sufficient column inches to make people think, oh, well, this is the next big band coming out of New York. So in a strange way, they came to the UK with a fan base who just trusted what they had read. And of course, they believed in what they had seen in Debbie Harry. And it was just a perfect combination of this. And they were ready-made, but the US had overlooked them. So I just found that really charming that today you would look up a band on Instagram, how many followers, how many streams, but it was actually all about taking the journalists' word for it. And hey, thank goodness they had great taste.
Back in the old analogue days. And Pasquale, and what about you? You love your music. I mean, I have to say, I really enjoyed this documentary.
Yeah, I thought it was great. And I think, as Natasha says, the structure is fairly standard. You've got talking head interviews, you've got lots of great archive, but the stories themselves are really, really interesting. And the interviews with Debbie Harry, she's interviewed there, sat next to the guitarist Chris Steen, and still looking great, both of them. And really the fans are the important people here. The kind of passionate, obsessive fans that collect their tickets in a photo album. Yeah. And this whole section where they talk about that first show in Bournemouth in
Bournemouth of all places, wasn't that hilarious?
I know. It's a seaside town, and the punk audience showing their affection, well, not in a traditional way, shall we say? Yeah. And but it was also this idea that they thought that the punk scene was very vibrant, but they said, look, it was also a little bit humorless as well. And Blondie brought a little bit of levity. And the discussion of Debbie Harry's persona, I think, was quite interesting. Someone called her a sexy punk Marilyn Monroe. Yeah. And I think this, this
fair enough.
Well, yeah, I suppose. And this focus on, she is a trailblazer for women in rock music. And the interviews with some of her fellow musicians, women musicians, are actually quite revealing.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, actually. There was one particular portrait, wasn't there, of all these brilliant women at the time all together, these musicians and singers.
That's right. Who did we have in it? We had Pauline Black, we had Viv Albertine, we had Debbie Harry herself, Susie Sue, Polystyrene. Yes. It was this really lovely meeting, and it was Pauline Black, who was actually in the Talking Heads. They're all in the portrait, but Pauline Black's in the Talking Heads, and she is talking about not just how influential Debbie Harry was for them as female musicians, but what was the ultimate nod, the ultimate sort of doff of the cap was that actually in our tour van it was on repeat. Yes, any music by Blondie was on repeat. So I love the respect, I love the reverence, but this is about the fans, really. It's about the fact that the British fans really embraced Blondie, and what a lovely touch to include people, Talking Heads, of whom none of us have heard, actual just Blondie fans, showing their scrapbooks, as Pasquale was saying. But it ranged from everything. It ranged from one guy saying, I just was 17 years old and showed up and said, hey, how's it going? And ended up on 2 tours with him. And then you've got Debbie and Chris laughing about how he was the unpaid intern.
Yeah. And then was he the PR guy?
No,
there was another guy,
really young guy.
Really young guy became the PR guy for them.
That was so funny, just because he was so handsome.
Neck to go up, but yeah, they did. But it's lovely. I got a real sense that I wasn't expecting, Pasquale, from them, of this kind of like, there was a real humanity about Chris and Debbie, in the way that they embraced these young people coming into the fold, if you like, and gave them opportunities. I hadn't been expecting anything like that.
And also, and very open, certainly at that early stage. And what I loved, some of these fanzines, some of the punk fanzines with names like Sniff and Glue. Yes. And one of them says, well, I was hanging around the Sniff and Glue offices. But then the interview also with their producer, Mike Chapman. So he was the producer of their terrific album Parallel Lines, which was, I think, 78. And how he talked about how he sculpted their sound. The idea was to tighten them up as a band. Yeah. So he felt they were a wee bit loose, and they needed that tightening up. And, just think of that album, Hanging on the Telephone, One Way or Another, Heart of Glass. I mean, wall-to-wall bangers, I think.
I thought that was interesting, Natasha, that he was kind of like, right, you're fine, you're doing okay, but actually you need to do more now.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show you how much raw talent it can only get you so far. Yeah. But to get out of Bournemouth, maybe, you need a key producer who has the eye and the ear to say, well, hold on a second, you have everything it takes. But his focus was getting them to number one, which is quite funny because that probably wasn't the focus of most punk groups. But it just goes to show how much of a pop element they have as well. But yeah, I really like your note there about the humanity that they showed. There was the woman who had been thrown in at the deep end. She was an amateur photographer. Get on stage and take photographs. Yeah. And she had never actually developed those photographs, but it was such a lovely story because she was so sincere in saying, there was me saying, I'm not good enough to do this. What am I going to do? And I turn around and I see Debbie Harry doing her thing. And I think, well, if she's just getting on with it, so will I. And, in the end, she didn't become a photographer, but she had this moment. Yeah. And then the full circle point is Debbie and Chris get to review those photographs and they bring back amazing memories. Yeah. So it was a really, really beautifully done documentary. As Pasquale says, not exactly reinventing the wheel, but 60 minutes of pure contentment.
Yeah, that was the case for me because it's not doing anything particularly innovative in the documentary format. No. But actually, that doesn't matter, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It's a really satisfying watch.
And that character, Jane Buchan, the fan and the photographer that you were talking about, I think they could have done it just about her. I mean, what a story she had. And then you've also got Pam Hogg, the Scottish fashion designer.
Great to see Pam, it really was.
What a look she had there. I mean, and she talks about the style, Debbie Harry's style, the fact that she could wear anything. Yeah. She could literally wear a bin liner, and she wore
she did.
She did. And she wore posters wrapped around her. So yes.
That was one of the lovely things about seeing the photographer's pictures, because then because Debbie Harry's looking at it, because that's the lovely thing. We see them now, incidentally, still looking amazing. Yes, absolutely extraordinary. Then she said, what am I wearing? And it's like, that's the poster. So she wore the poster as a kind of skirt. And it was lovely those memories came back to her.
Yeah. And I really like the fact that the documentary is topped and tailed by footage of the band in its current form, the current lineup at this year's Glastonbury. Because what's more quintessentially British, if that's what the documentary's about, than Glastonbury? And then you have those incredible drone shots that shows the crowd that turned out for them, knowing that they were just about to have, I think, Pasquale, did you just say wall-to-wall bangers? That's what they were going to get all afternoon. So why would you choose anything else on the schedule from Glastonbury that year? Because what an opportunity to see Debbie Harry still as charismatic as ever. Yeah. And still, maybe she can't sing as well as she could, but come on, she's 78
she's
or something.
Extraordinary.
It's bonkers. So it's, you would definitely just do anything to get a ticket to that gig. And it was so great to see.
Pasquale, obviously so many of our listeners are big fans of music. Would you encourage them to be watching this documentary?
I mean, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a massive Blondie fan. I mean, I know the big hits, some of the big albums, but I think it's it revealed a lot about their beginnings, and I think the importance of Britain. And we wanted to be a British band, is what she says. Yeah. She had this affinity with the UK.
Would you have liked to have seen a bit more of Debbie Harry, Pasquale?
Possibly, but I think it is about the fans. It is more about the fans, this particular one. It's not really a biographical documentary. Yes, it would be great to see more Debbie Harry talking about her life, and actually as an actress as well. it's not relevant here, but she is a great actress. Videodrome, Union City.
That's right, yeah.
In the 80s, as well as her music career, she had this career as a quite daring actress as well.
Yeah, I think that was maybe for me one of the most important aspects of the documentary. Natasha, the idea of her being a kind of like, a real proper sort of feminist icon too, because it was that whole idea, as we heard earlier on with the photographer saying, well, if I can see her going off and doing it, then that's encouragement for me too. I thought that was really important.
Absolutely. It's easy to forget that when you look back. It just seems as though, female front woman, female front woman, of course, but front woman of a band, making music, the likes of which a lot of the scene hadn't really heard, slightly different with its own twist, seems completely de rigueur now.
Yeah.
But at the time, that was a bit eye-popping. You're not long out of the 60s.
Yeah.
You're not long, it's just all of a sudden, when did they form? 74 or something?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the column inches that were dedicated to them, it wasn't all...
Yeah.
It wasn't all positive.
No.
And so much of it came down to her look, and there were people resentful of the fact that she just had it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I felt sorry looking at some of the photographs of her reading those bad reviews and thinking, obviously, what are they saying? But
good that those were flung in there as well in terms of the texture of the documentary, I think, though. Well, look, thank you both very much indeed, Natasha and Pasquale. When Blondie Came to Britain is on BBC Two this Saturday night at 9, and having talked about them, we have to play a song.